Okay, motorcycle carburetor 101. First off, tools of the trade. Clean workspace. You're going to want one of these little magnet trays. They make life easier. All you really need to do this, small Phillips head, slightly bigger Phillips head. Some screws are wallered out and you need a bigger one. Small impact driver. If you don't know what one of these is, look it up. It's pretty simple. Put it in the screw, tap it with the hammer, it'll get it loose. These old screws on the carburetors sometimes require it. I like this nice little one here. It's just enough to do that. Sometimes you may need a prying implement. I use a small flat braided screwdriver. A mechanic pick set is nice, but I have found that I only ever use this one, so this is my carburetor pick. Unless you have teeny tiny fingers, needle nose pliers. You're also going to want to have a flashlight on hand. And yeah, I like to lay my tools out like a surgeon, and I keep them on this this whole shop towel just so they don't roll away. Makes life easier. Alright, so here goes nothing. I'm not big on doing how-to videos, but I think it's time. Anyways, we're going to learn you a thing or two about motorcycle carburetors. Most all your bikes produced prior to 2007 are going to run a carburetor, and actually some of the 2024 models still run a carburetor. It's not rocket science. It's not a mystery. So, first thing we're going to go over is there's two styles of carburetor. Okay, so what we've got here is a Kian round slide carburetor from a small Japanese dirt bike. I do believe it's off of a Honda CR80. I've already had it apart. It's been on my shelf for the last 3-4 years. Very simple to design, and pretty much, there's a few differences, but just about all motorcycle carburetors are going to work off of the same principle. So let's go ahead and take it apart. You've got a drain on the bottom here. Drain the fuel out before you take it off the bike. And we'll go ahead and we'll take the float, or excuse me, take the bowl off. That's why I love those magnetic trays. You never lose screws and little bits. Okay. Now, this guy's pretty dang simple. You've got right here your overflow tube. Gas gets to filling up too much because your floats are stuck. It'll go out this tube and out this little port on the side and drain all over the ground. So, what would cause that? Well, pretty simple mechanism to meter how much fuel is in that float bowl. These are your floats. They float on the gasoline. When it goes down like this, and you can see inside here, this little valve is opening and closing. And that's called the needle valve. As the gasoline rises up, it shuts the valve. Simple system. We'll go ahead and take this apart, and this is where your mechanic's pick comes in handy. Just give this little pin just a gentle little persuasion. Take that out, put it in the tray. You gotta be gentle. It's really easy to lose this needle. So what I generally do, I'll turn it over this way, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Turn it over this way so the needle is on the bottom, and go on ahead and pull it out. Now, as you see, there's this little tang piece right here. That's why I had you turn it over that way, so that that doesn't fall off and on the floor. Pull this out. This is your needle seat, your needle valve. And as you can see, it's got a little rubber tip on it. I don't know how well the camera's picking it up, but this one here is pretty much shot. There's a ridge worn in the rubber. But what this little guy does is down inside here, where my thumb's at. Hopefully you can see that. That's your fuel passage. That's where fuel comes into the carburetor bowl. And you can see here, this is where your fuel line would hook up. And there's a passage directly to here, and that's what controls it, that little needle valve. That's what lets fuel in and out of the carb. If these get a hole in them or they're worn out, sometimes, obviously, if there's fuel in it and not air, it's going to go open like this. It's going to sink to the bottom of the bowl, which would cause fuel to spill out. If this little guy here is worn out when they're up and it's not sealing inside that hole, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to cause fuel to spill out of the overflow. That's the float system. Pretty simple. You've got two jets. This is your main. This is your primary. This controls anything past quarter throttle. This controls at idle. And what these do is it's a little tiny passageway up into the carburetor to allow gas to get drawn up through with vacuum, mix with air, and go into the engine. As you see, as this needle would come out of that hole, it'll allow the fuel to spray up in. This has got to be clear. I know it is. I can see through it. The camera's probably not picking it up, but I can see, maybe you can tell now, you see daylight through it. It's definitely clear, and the primary is clear as well, so they're fine. Nothing needs done. Now, as far as adjusting a carburetor, obviously the bigger this hole is, the more fuel it's going to go through. So if you've done something like put a performance air cleaner and a performance exhaust on your motorcycle and you need more fuel because it is now moving more air, you need more fuel to keep that mixture at the right percentage, you would put a bigger jet in here. And now, depending on where your engine likes the fuel, which you can do this by feel, by ear, or by doing a spark plug test, you know, if you're running lean in the mid throttle to wide open throttle, you're going to want a bigger one. If you're running rich during those portions of throttle, you're going to want a smaller one. If you're running lean at idle, you can change this, but first what you would do, here's your idle mixture screw. They're almost always universally set from the factory. Where you start at is 1.5 turns out. So what you would do, turn it in all the way. Don't crank it tight, just till it stops. And see right there, if you want, you could put a little mark on your screwdriver with a magic marker, but you go around once, and then give it another half turn. And then you start from there. You do your spark plug test. Generally, you're going to want to tune it by ear, honestly, this. But when you open it up, you're allowing more fuel. When you close it up, you're allowing less fuel. And what you're doing is that screw going into here, into that passage, that's blocking off that passage or opening that passage and allowing more fuel to get pulled up through. Now, if you cannot get enough fuel through this, then this is when you would go ahead and put a fatter jet in on your primary. But if you're dealing with a stock engine, you really don't need to do much more than just kind of tune this by ear until you get a nice smooth idle. Your idle adjustment is controlled by this screw right here, and as you can see down inside, a little end piece that sticks out. Now, we don't have the proper carburetor slide for this bike because it was lost in like 2010 or something. But it would have a little notch cut in here, and the notch would be tapered downwards like this. So as you tighten that screw, it's going to move in. As it moves in, it's going to force this up. Move that up, you allow more air in, you pull this needle out of this hole, and you allow more fuel in. So that would be back and forth how you would adjust your idle. And the ideal thing that you want to do is get the lowest idle possible and still be smooth. So you would kind of tweak that back and forth and then adjust there. But yeah, this is your small, pretty much every carburetor on a motorcycle works off of this principle. It's about as simple as it gets. Got one more thing to show you, and that would be the enriching circuit or the choke. Now, you're thinking car, you're thinking a plate that blocks everything off. It's not like that on a motorcycle. Not on this style. On this style, what you've got is, look right here, You can see a passageway. This right here is a valve. Right now it's shut. You pull it up, you're opening that valve and you're allowing fuel directly into the engine. Even if the slide is closed and the throttle's closed and blocked off like this, you're going to allow fuel to spit right out of here and right into the engine. It's also got a half set. This one's almost worn out. That's wide open. There should be a detent right there for a half choke, and it's almost worn out. Be right there, and that would be off. So when you're dealing with a carburetor like this, when you're going to start the engine, when you choke it like this, you leave your throttle closed. Don't want to have the throttle wide open. You're defeating the purpose. You need the vacuum of the engine to pull fuel up through. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of how these little things work. We'll get into something a little more complicated, but they all work on the same principle. Fuel lays down in this sucker, gets sucked up through this sucker, comes out of this hole right here and into the engine. And this little thing here is like a valve. As it comes out, it gets smaller. If it gets smaller, more fuel goes through. So hopefully that kind of simplifies it for you. Maybe I just confused you. I don't know. I'm a little better at working on bikes than I am at making videos, so this is Carburetor 101 small carb. On to the next part, street bike carbs. Alright, so now you know the basics. We're going to get something a little bit more intricate. Don't let all this intimidate you. This is a carburetor bank from a Honda Goldwing, a GL 1200 model, and this is one of the more complicated systems that Honda put together. We're not going to get into a V4 Magna carburetor setup. That's even wilder, but essentially the principles are identical with one little difference or two. Okay, so now we showed you how the 2-cycle carburetor worked, a little dirt bike. This is a diaphragm style carburetor. This is the proper slide, and this is your needle. It works the same. Goes down inside here. Got to clock it right. You see this little guy here has got to go down like that, and it's got a seal. There's a cap. There's a spring. And the spring can be a double to get back together. Essentially, that spring holds that sucker shut. When vacuum is applied inside here, it overpowers the spring, drawing this up, working the same way. As this goes up, the needle comes out of the jet, down inside. Hopefully y'all can see this. Actually, here, let me see if I can light it up a little better. Oh, and you decided to die right now, flashlight, huh? Right down inside there's your needle. It's the same flipping thing. Same flipping thing, dude. But on this guy, you got some butterfly valve controlled by the throttle. When you open the throttle, the valve opens. That's what allows vacuum to come in there and do your magic with the engine sucking on it. And that is the main difference in these two carburetor styles. Whereas on your 2-stroke carburetor, or your small dirt bike carburetor, there's a cable that directly pulls this up and down. On this style carburetor, air pressure is used to move this up and down. Now the back side of it is pretty much the same thing, very close. This carburetor is a little worse for wear. This is an old junk set that I got for parts. So same setup, same jets, except instead of on the 2-cycle, you seen had little tubes sticking out for an idle. You got something like this that somebody tried to get out and break, and that's why this is a junk set. But all 4 other carbs are good, and I have parts to fix this. Your floats work in the same exact manner. In fact, I'll even pull them out to show you if they'll even come out of this devil. Guess I should have pre-disassembled this a little further. Get the pins started a little. You just want to fight today, don't you? You just want to fight me. You know what? We are not going to deal with that on camera. So give me a second and I'll get that part. Okay, this is why rebuild kits come with new pins. I got it out, but I really boogered it up, and that is a tight fit in there, so that little bit of boogering on it, that's why it got stuck. Somebody ham-fisted this apart at one point. Just a little pick, pull it apart. Needle valve comes off. And this is not the best needle valve. Hopefully it's coming into focus here. This is not the best one I've ever seen, but it's still serviceable. It's got a little bit of a ridge worn in it. And down inside this hole here, same thing. Right there is where your fuel comes in. The floats drop down. When the floats drop down, your needle valve pulls out of this hole, breaks the seal, and allows fuel to come in through this right here, the fuel line, and fill up the carburetor bowl. Now, this design is a little bit different. This is your actual bowl. There's not much to it. The body here fills up more than the bowl, whereas on your little guy carburetor, your bowl is pretty much what fills up, but same difference. And you can see what gas turns into with ethanol over time. And it's the same deal. There's a gasket here. This one is totally shot. And it's just an O-ring shaped like this. So this needs a carburetor rebuild completely. As you can see, these jets are busted off. This would never run right if you put it on the bike. When you buy a rebuild kit, even your cheap $20 kit that does all 4 carburetors is going to have new jets. They're going to be the factory size jets. So if you've got bigger jets in because, let's say you put a performance intake and exhaust, you're not going to get that with a rebuild kit. You're going to have to order them separately or, try to drill them out. But essentially, it is the same setup. There is nothing to be afraid of with these things. They're very easy to deal with. Let's get our little tiny parts put where they should be. Choke on this, kind of a similar affair. Works off of this lever right here, and as you can see, the cotter pin on this guy is actually missing. There should be a little clip here. But essentially, when you pull the choke lever on the bike, this is connected to all of them, and it moves them all at the same time. And if you see how this is moving right here, this should be pulling this out, like this. But obviously, we're missing that part. And it's essentially the same deal. It opens a valve and lets raw fuel directly into the engine, which is why if you fool with a Goldwing, when you're trying to start it and you choke it and you open your throttle all the way, it ain't going to start. That's why. You need to have that closed so the vacuum can pull on that valve and draw raw fuel through these ports right here directly into the intake. So, like I said, this is just one carburetor bolted to this big old housing. Honda has a weird way of doing things, man. They've got a big vacuum balancing thing, and the carburetors are heated with antifreeze from the engine in the bottom of the intake here. They're a whole different animal. So, forget all that nonsense. What you need to know, the important shit you need to know is all right here. And this diaphragm right here. This has to be clean of tears and soft to the touch. Modern gasoline, even just the vapors coming through, because gas really doesn't touch this, but even just the vapors coming through will make this brittle and make this crack. Well, if that's all brittle and cracked, when pressure comes up out of these ports to tell this thing what to do, and there's no seal, then this thing will just stay down. Now your engine might run on this carb, might run on this carb, might run on this carb. Maybe this guy's just the only one that's torn. It's not going to run right. Now I know of a couple old timers who used to tune these springs. They would take a couple clips out of them to make them a little weaker so that the slides would boom, boom, wrap open real quick. Good Lord, it's the middle of winter and there is a bee in here. Sorry, buddy, we're not dealing with that. Okay. But yeah, that's where we're at. These are not as complicated as people think. Do not be afraid to tear into one. Do not be afraid to try to rebuild one. I got a bike coming here. Hopefully in about 2 weeks. A friend of mine has an older, I think it's a 1973 or 75 Honda CB350. And he literally, he dropped about $1,500 at a local shop. And I'm not going to name the shop because they're actually friends of mine. I get parts through them. They essentially did a once-over, gave him a good tune-up and a good carburetor clean and rebuild. And we're talking an engine with points. New points, condensers, whole 9 yards. Rode his bike home, and he's a very busy man who works a lot, so his bike sat for a full year with modern gasoline in the carburetor. Now his bike don't run right, and he says, I ain't paying another $1,500. I said, dude, bring it over. I need to start charging people more. My fee for a friend is, well, you're going to buy me a nice lunch somewhere, and I'll fix your bike, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. That's what we're here for at Phoenix Motorsports. We make them rise from the ashes and ride again. Thanks for watching. Catch y'all later. It's Kevin6154. I got some stuff to do, man.